Thanks very much, Ilona. And yeah, fantastic to be here in front of a small and safe live audience and obviously live streaming to everybody at home as well. I'm going to start with a really simple question and just ask everybody from the panel just to introduce themselves. Ben, maybe if we start down the far end and work our way along, if you can just introduce yourself.
I'm Ben Jaffray. I'm Head of Commercial Strategy and Finance at Bruntwood Works. So my role is I'm responsible for overseeing our Flex business and was involved in the launch of our Spark Business Support Programme. During my 5 years at Bruntwood Works, I've been involved in a number of fairly big innovation projects, so hopefully we've got some good things to add to the conversation today.
Hi everyone, I'm Olivia Jaskolka, the Marketing Director at A&S. We are a cloud and digital services provider. So my role is obviously very marketing focused, but I work really closely with the sales team to drive business generation, and hopefully again through the course of the conversation today you'll see how marketing can be involved in that innovation conversation as well.
Hi everyone, my name is Jay Dunning. I work for DWF. I am one of the innovation leads and responsible for creativity and design. I've got the very daunting task of trying to make something out of some of the ideas that come up and into the business and also from outside. So hopefully it'll be a kind of an interesting debate and discussion.
Brilliant, thanks guys. So the topic of the panel is starting small and failing fast. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the ways that we can do that. But I guess just to dive straight in and to point the first question, I guess to you, Jay, with I guess out of everybody on the panel, the kind of most direct responsibility for innovation. What would you consider to be the catalysts for innovation? How does it start?
Well, it starts mainly with people. That's the easy answer, I suppose. But where within people it starts? Well, it can come from a variety of different directions, actually. It's, classic top-down, we're going to innovate here, senior management team, or even bottom-up. So grassroots, I've seen this, done this, heard about this. How can we incorporate this? So a lot of it is focused around people. I think so the catalysts that your general catalysts you see as, external, outside influences. So especially in an industry like mine within legal services, we're constantly looking at what other industries are doing better than us and how can we steal some of those ideas and incorporate into what we do. So that's a big catalyst for change. I would say, the movement of technology is a huge catalyst. However, it's not just about technology, which should be the catalyst about change. For me, that's an enabler to the idea at hand. I always try and backtrack people a few more steps and look at what's the problem to be solved or what's the job to be done, and really understand it from that user's perspective. So that'll be really important, I think, holding on to that as we move into more of a technology-enabled world and, more innovative.
And Ben, obviously you work for Bruntwood Works, so commercial, real estate, office space. Much changed for you recently that's kind of sparked any innovation?
Yeah, quite a lot, I would say. I think so innovation can happen sort of incrementally and organically and in quite a natural way, but I'm actually quite a believer in that sort of really proactive seeking out innovation and almost bringing together groups of people with that purpose of, right, let's look at ways that we can do things differently. So one of the things that we do well at Bruntwood Works is that we really encourage people to get out and visit new places, new cities, countries, but also looking at different industries and the way that they're doing things and looking at ways that we can almost take some of the good things about those and apply them and integrate them into our business. So I think that cross-pollination of ideas and looking at different ways of doing things is a really good way of kind of bringing about that innovation in a really quick and effective way.
And Olivia, for you guys at A&S, obviously it's a really fast-moving business. You're kind of at the I guess, bleeding edge of some technologies. How does innovation how does it happen within A&S? What's the kind of role for marketing and the marketing team?
Yeah, I think you touched on it there, and we touched about market trends and competitors. Technology is a sector of innovate or die, and it's literally a case of that, really. So we've had to drive a culture of innovation throughout the entire business and make sure that everybody's given the freedom to innovate and experiment, as much as they like without the fear of consequences or mistakes, because otherwise, we'll never drive forward as a business and keep up with that competition or ahead of it as we try to be.
Really interesting, and obviously, like I said, the title of the panel session is "Start Small and Fail Fast." So just to, I guess, to kind of flip that question on its head a little bit, and you touched upon it briefly there, Olivia. What are the barriers to innovation? How could you stop innovation happening within a business?
I mean, there's all sorts, isn't there? There's budget, there's not having the amount of resource to dedicate to it, who is going to take control of it, who's got those ideas, the fear of the unknown as well. I think sometimes when you talk about innovation, everybody thinks it's got to be something huge and world-changing. It could be something really small and just a small idea that, grows and grows. So, we do come across all those different types of barriers. And like I said, we try and drive a culture that tries to squash all those, especially the budget barrier and things like that, because it doesn't necessarily, an idea or an innovative idea doesn't necessarily have to have a budget associated to it in the first instance. So.
And Jay, with the because I'm right in saying that you kind of work within DWF Ventures, which is almost the sort of innovation part of a huge legal services firm. Yeah. How do those two things work together, and what are the potential barriers there as well?
Well, picking up on sort of what Olivia was saying, then there is three mortal enemies, as you mentioned. There's lots of different ones, but three mortal enemies in terms of barriers that we come across. One is bureaucracy, red tape, and politics. Usually the main three that are the barriers to innovation and things moving as they should. Where we sit in Ventures is almost at the centre of giving people the voice and providing an environment for an idea to try and thrive, to shield them from that bureaucracy and red tape, to try and cut through that as fast as we can using a design process that puts the customer or the user at the centre of what we're doing, and forget about the politics, forget about why you'd want something done in a particular way, who we're doing this for. And that sort of accelerated process that, shields them from what you were saying, from the fear of failure and fear of uncertainty. It's okay to fail with me or with my team. So that's, yeah.
And Ben, for Bruntwood and working in, property and real estate, which are traditionally fairly long life cycle projects, how does the kind of pace of change and pace of innovation work within an organisation like Bruntwood?
I think probably over the last sort of three years, you've seen a massive growth in that move towards flexible working. So as a barrier to innovation, it can sometimes be the fact that you can become a bit too wedded to your existing business model. And it's that idea of almost what works for you as a business might not work for your customers or for the end users. So you have to have that sort of long-term vision to be able to see where the market trends are going, but also be willing to take that step almost before it's too late. So we've seen this real explosion in flexible working, and it's something that we've had to probably adapt to and move very quickly and probably quicker than traditionally you would in that sort of property sector. And, like with any business, there'll be some people who fully embrace that and, buy into that vision. And then you'll have people who are a bit more resistant. But I think over time, you've sort of seen that trend isn't kind of going anywhere. So it's a case of very much you have to adapt and move with that market. Otherwise, you are going to find yourself left behind.
Yeah. Olivia, you've mentioned already that A&S as an organisation kind of exists within this context where you have to innovate or die. That's the kind of nature of the sector and the kind of competitive element, I guess, to a certain extent. So within A&S, where does innovation sit? Who owns it?
Yeah, there's a couple of things, Rick, a couple of answers to that question, really. So in terms of how we take a message to market, that sits with the technical team. So our CTO, technical director, we've got an office of the CTO who all sit behind, constantly looking at, the next, and what that is. And then internally, ideas come from everyone, and we kind of use the marketing team as the conduit to bring all those ideas together, bring our creative selves to the table, and also marketing ones with some of the budget. So sometimes they come to us because we have got that freedom to try some things with a little bit of budget. So yeah, externally it's the technical team, but internally it's kind of marketing.
And Ben and Jay, I kind of point it to both of you really, because obviously there's a responsibility for innovation in both of your kind of roles and responsibilities. How does that change where sort of innovation sits within the organisation? Do you almost find the organisation looking to you to steer and drive innovation? Rather than it coming from within the Olivia's idea of it kind of coming from everywhere.
Yeah, we segment ideas almost in the fact that innovation to us is something new that will provide value. So it's brand new to us. And then there's almost the continuous improvement side of change as well. But we've separated the two. We want innovation to be, new for starters. And then of that, there are two segments. One is, your incremental stuff that Ben was mentioning, which can be adding technology to make you do your job faster or enhance your customer experience. Or it can be more radical in the fact that, more free thinking about the next 10 years. Where would we be? What would happen if somebody come along and did this? And we've completely segregated that innovation world from our continuous improvement world, because we want to make those distinctions between, nuts and bolts changes, more paper clips in the paperclip cupboard. I need this sort of paper, not that sort of paper. From the, the stuff that's going to make real material difference. I mean, it all makes a difference, but, the stuff that, can change a business model, or it can enhance almost what you do as a business. And separating that is something we've done anyway.
Yeah, I think in the context of that radical innovation, one of the things that we've been experimenting with is the idea of sort of small black ops teams, whose job it is to basically you bring together a group of people and give them a brief to go and innovate. It might be a certain product or area of the business. So I've been involved in these, and I think they're really effective. And one of the books that I read recently is this Rebel Ideas, and it's the idea of bringing together diverse groups of people, putting them together, and you just get this sort of exponential growth in terms of the ideas that you can create. And I think that's something that has been adopted within our business. It's very much a case of trying to bring different parts of the business together, but giving everyone that sort of ownership of bringing ideas to the table. And I think when you do it in that almost sort of formal way and saying, you've got a brief of let's get creative, I think you can find that people are much more sort of forthcoming, and it's almost a way of sort of letting the handbrake off for people. So you get people bringing ideas who would possibly normally be a little bit more standoffish. So I think those sort of small black ops teams are a really good way of sort of creating and harnessing innovation, particularly because you look at the kind of senior people in a lot of businesses, and they often do come from quite a sort of narrow field. So opening it up to the whole business is a really good way of, I think, sort of bringing about that radical innovation that a lot of people are looking for.
Yeah, well, to just add to that point, just on the radical stuff, the Black Ops, we call it covert ops, solve and innovation sessions. And one of the things that we found is almost there's a cap on how radical people inside the organisation can go. So one of the things we've looked to try and establish in the last 12 months or so is bringing people from the external, mixing it, like you say. The Rebel Ideas book's a great one. Plug in your Matthew Said. And he mixing diverse thought and different people and skill sets in the design process that we use is great, but also throwing in a few externals that have no bearing and have that naivety that can bring as a strength to say, why do you do it like that? That's ridiculous. These guys do it like this. So it really does benefit as well. So I would say that's a really good point.
I agree with what both of them said, really. That diversity of that Black Ops group or the covert group is only going to bring more and more different ideas and different opinions, and just having a really diverse group of people in that room or in that operation. Yeah, definitely.
But you can't just sort of throw people into a room with a brief to innovate, right? That's too blank a piece of paper. So how do you guys work through that? What kind of methodologies do you use, or how do you steer that in some way to kind of give almost, I guess, the kind of freedom of a tight brief to a certain extent?
I think it needs to be structured to some extent. So an example of a project I was involved with was the Pioneer project, which is a large investment into the Bruntwood Works portfolio, where the brief on that project was go away and design the office of the future. So that's almost your starting point. And from then on, it's almost then looking at different sectors, different countries, visiting different places, and trying to look at all of the different ways that you can bring some of those ideas together and sort of link it to the brief that we were given in that example.
I would say there's this almost sliding scale of how much you want to concentrate on the framework that you put in place and methodology. I mean, the go-to one we use is a mixture of design thinking from the ideals world or school of thought versus, Google's design sprints methodology. So we mash all different methodologies together to get an outcome. But I think what you can do is a sliding scale of, if you want to sort of ramp it up and make, phased approach, and it's going to run like this with these techniques, you're probably not going to get as radical or open idea as if you just sort of lessen that a little bit and just signpost a few things. Make sure you think about your customers and clients. How are you empathizing here? Who are you thinking your groups are for? How is that solution linked to what problem? What's the real job to be done? And signpost stuff, you can probably let more creative flair and the juices go a little bit. So it depends on what, project you're running and working on, but you can slide that level of emphasis on a methodology, I think.
Brilliant. And it's great that we're all here today talking around the topic of innovation, and it's a fantastic panel session talking specifically about how some of that works. But successful businesses, by their nature, are also at some point stable and efficient, and they just kind of work through the things that they need to work through. You can't constantly just be experimenting with new ways. How do you balance that? What's the balance between a stable and efficient business and experimentation with new things that could ultimately lead to an innovative breakthrough? Olivia, how does that kind of work for you guys at A&S?
Yeah, I guess you're right. There has to be a balance because there's a job to do, there's BAU to do. Like I said at the beginning, we try to incorporate into the culture so people are always thinking about it, but facilitate that time and a place where people can bring those ideas to the table and, expand on them. So I guess, I don't think there's a hard and fast rule. I think sometimes there'll be time for more innovation than others. You've also got to give time for those ideas to come to fruition and then for the rest of the business to catch up and follow you on that journey. So you don't want to be in this constant innovation loop because otherwise, nobody will be able to keep up with your staff and your teams and your customers as well.
I think there's things like change fatigue. Every business is different, but I think change fatigue, appetite for change are all sort of first ports of things to consider. I then think, you've got then a portfolio of change. So you've got how much is radical, how much is incremental, and you don't want too much radical because too much chaos is, a bad thing, and you don't want just incremental because you'll not go anywhere or really change the game for your business or your industry. So I think there's a balance of a portfolio, and it might just be, the odd one or two chaotic ideas that you run with for the year, with the majority of them being incremental. And then I would say segmenting, back to the segmentation idea of segment your innovation from your continuous improvement world and treat them differently and appropriately for your business.
Yeah, I think it depends where you are in your business cycle ultimately, but one of the tools that we've used that I do feel is quite effective is that horizon planning model where you're looking at almost your next 12 months, your 12 months to 36, and then your longer term stuff, and almost structuring your business strategy around that. And I think it's also quite a good way of almost looking at how you're allocating your resources in terms of people, but also capital. So you're getting a really good sort of overview of whether you're putting enough into the right areas and making sure that you're not sort of focusing too much on one at the expense of the other. So I think that's a good way of almost planning your innovation and strategy.
And Ben, in your introduction, you kind of talked a little bit about how you have responsibility for commercial and for innovation. One of the things that's always fascinated me is how organisations budget for innovation. How can you put numbers to ideas and opportunities that you can't even necessarily really see yet, or not tangible anyway?
So I'm a chartered accountant, so this is a subject that's pretty close to my heart, but I'm actually a big believer in R&D pots and almost ring fencing a certain amount of your budget or capital for investing in sort of riskier projects or innovation. I think, the nature of it is that with innovation comes risk, and with that comes the chance of failure. So I think it's important that you almost identify an amount of capital that you're willing to sort of speculate on effectively with innovation. But But at the same time, I'm also probably a believer that you don't want to be too much constrained by budgets as well. You know, the nature of innovation is that it can be quite opportunistic as well. And the last thing you want is to be faced with these opportunities, but almost be too constrained by your budget to pursue things. So I think it's that balance of, you know, your R&D pots, but being able to sort of pounce on opportunities as and when they present themselves.
And Olivia, in one of your earlier answers, you said that, you know, kind of you and your team are budget holders, so people sometimes come to you a little bit.
Everyone's always knocking on the door. I guess like the clue for me is in the title, it starts small and fail fast. So if you put a narrative around innovation of experimentation, you're experimenting with something, it means it can be small. You can put a small budget to it or no budget to it. And if you fail fast, it doesn't work, or you measure the hell out of it and it really does work, then there's your business case to go to your accountant and ask for some more money for it.
I'll say no.
Yeah, I'm not the accountant, so I'm literally the one that's trying to convince you, I think, to release it. But I think Ventures, from the team I'm with, from the sort of very small team we've got, and the analogy with the reason why we set up was we went to our senior board directors and said, look, we're almost like an R&D pot team as itself, if you can, you know, look at it like that. And we said, our analogy is, it's a bit like you having a pot of money that you take to the casino and say, what are you willing to spend on the roulette table? That's us mixed with the SAS team, because we're that sort of black ops team that can go in there. So it's those two things that the Ventures team's made up of me being sort of the centre of the creative stuff and managing ideas and designs through the pipeline. We've got the Horizon Scan leads and the collaboration leads, and then we've got a technology lead that looks at, you know, the hype cycle of tech and say, oh, everyone's going to have VR next week. Are they? Really? How far is that? And is that something we need to invest in? Is that ideas that we need to pump through the process? And then do I need to go cap in hand to the accountant and say we need some, you know, investment case in X, Y, and Z because of X, Y, and Z? So, yeah, it's, like I say, flexibility is, I think, is key for budget.
Does that create friction at any times within the business? So there will be certain elements of your businesses, I presume, where budget is fairly tightly ring-fenced and is quite easily measurable, and you know, you can kind of see a reasonable distance down the path as to, you know, what the budget requirement is for that, versus some of these some of the kind of R&D or innovation projects which are less tangible. They do come a little bit more left field. Does that kind of ever create any friction? And if it does, how do you overcome that? How do you distinguish between what's happening within the business and where innovation is coming from and kind of commercial considerations of that? I'm looking directly at you again, Ben.
Yeah, I guess potentially one of the areas I think that is quite challenging is around, if you're focusing on your sort of business as usual product, let's say you're pulling together an investment case for spending some money, you've normally got a fairly good idea of what the likely return on that is going to be. The nature of innovation is that it is much more unpredictable, so it's more difficult to almost foresee, well, we want to try this, but you need to be much more flexible in terms of your expectations, your hurdle rates for signing off capital, and you're often doing that within the constraints of, you know, formal sign-off processes, shareholder returns. So it's almost balancing those things and, you know, trying to put as much kind of robust science behind the theory of what it is you're trying to innovate and what you expect to return off that investment, I would say.
And one of the things that you mentioned before, Ben, was, in fact, all of you did actually, this idea of kind of bringing people together and creating, you know, whether it's squads or black ops or covert ops or whatever it might be. But if innovation doesn't sort of belong to a particular team who are kind of over there doing innovation, and nobody can kind of really touch and feel what it is that they're doing, but if it's kind of spread a little bit more across the business, that overcomes that friction as well a little bit, really. That innovation feels like it belongs to all of us and can come from anywhere, and when the time is right, we'll put together these kind of small, multidisciplinary, tight brief teams, rather than it almost just feeling like it belongs somewhere else.
Yeah, the trick is to not have the business think it's just innovation's a bottle of things that you just open up every now and again and just some magic flies out. And it's about keeping the idea generators close to following their ideas through from creation through to inception and development, and keeping them involved all the way through. And what happens there is a case study appears at the end of the rainbow, and they're able to tell their friends, and culturally over time that starts to change, because it's a very difficult thing to change, is people's perception on change, is because nobody likes it at the end of the day, as much as they like to think they're open-minded enough. Once people get set in a routine and on a way, it's difficult to change. And the necessity has all been brought upon us with the COVID pandemic, and us working from home, so it's accelerated our rate of change just because we've had to. So I think just trying to keep people close to ideas, close to a process, and that goes for sort of the top level as well. So the CEOs for our business, we have regular intervals we speak to them on a monthly basis to talk to them about their portfolio. This is where we've got investment in resource. This is where we've got investment in time. We're going to need some of your people to do this. Are you happy with that? That's a necessary thing for us to do because of the time charge rate out for lawyers. So it can get quite costly to spend money on an idea where you need subject matter experts. So, but I think keeping people close to the ideas and the processes is key for me.
And just last question, really now. We've talked quite a bit about starting small and building teams and that kind of thing, but the second half of the title is fail fast, and most organisations, most people aren't comfortable with failure. And Olivia, you mentioned that it's something that you've tried to make almost a safe space in A&S. How do you do that? How do you help people and the organisation more widely be comfortable with the possibility that this might not work?
Yeah, I think Jay touched on the idea of case study and stuff. So if you do an experiment or you do have an innovative idea and you've got a group of people working on it, communicate that back to the business, and also communicate the good stuff and the ones that fail as well, so people can see that we do have ideas. They're not all going to work, they don't all cost X amount or cost loads or not at all, and sharing it then, and that can give you the kind of the comfort to try something yourself.
Is that different at Bruntwood, Ben, because of the nature of the length of the projects, and these are big, iconic bricks and mortar projects to some extent? Does that idea of failure does Bruntwood consider that differently?
I guess it depends. That example you're using is almost a project being the creation of a building, which there is a tangible sort of end product that you're creating. That's one example, but there'll be other things that are more sort of conceptual and where you're layering on services and things that aren't quite as tangible. So yeah, in a way, yes, but I think one of the theories that I'm quite kind of keen on is this idea of sort of loss aversion, and the fact that a good example is sort of a stockbroker or investor who's got a loss-making investment, and they almost don't want to sort of realise that loss and sell that investment and effectively make it real. And I think that's a very real risk with any kind of innovation, is that with the loss makers, you have people who are so heavily invested in it that almost they don't want to walk away, because you're sort of admitting defeat with things. So I think with any sort of innovation project, it's quite important that you do have that walk away point, and you're able to say, right, look, we'll accept that this specific project wasn't a success, but actually there's learnings we can take from it, and we can apply it to our next project. We can take things into it. It's creating that culture of being able to accept it, and actually people's egos and reputations not being too damaged in the process. And I think that is something that Bruntwood as a business does really well, is creates that culture where people can do that and not have to be too sort of heavily invested and can't walk away from a project.
Yeah. And you mentioned a couple of times then the kind of idea of risk aversion and loss aversion. Jay, solicitors, lawyers.
Yeah, risk averse, yeah, sort of. It's a difficult scenario to be in, but I say two things, I suppose, very quickly. One is we encompass something called black box thinking inside of our decision making on ideas, which softens the blow. It's not a binary, yes, your idea is great, no, it's rubbish. It's somewhere in between, whereas it could be a yes, but not right now. So we black box that idea. It's, funnily enough, it's another Matthew Said book, actually, black box thinking. And yeah, we take concepts from black box. So we're saying, yeah, we like your idea, but not quite now. It might be a budget thing, it might be a timing thing, it might be a technology thing, but we keep that in mind. And then ultimately what we try and do is not just case study the the good points that we work with, but also the bad ones. And people naturally are interested in the 9 failures, not necessarily the 1 success out of the 10. So understanding why it failed and making lessons, kind of cliche, I know, but learning from that lessons makes it not a failure, because you're using that in future iterations to actually make it a success. So they're the 2 things I would say on that point.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. It's been really, really interesting. Thanks very much for your time and for your answers. It's been superb.
Thanks ever so much to all of the panellists there. Some really interesting discussions, and very grateful to all of them for giving up their time. Do want to just give an extra shout out there to Bruntwood Works on the panel, obviously one of our sponsors today, but also for a huge company to have taken a chance on working with the startup from literally our day one was pretty huge, and actually listening to everything that goes on behind the scenes explains a lot about why they were able to do that, and why hopefully they feel as well the partnership has been such a success.